Friday, April 9th, 2021, about 3 o'clock. See if sound is coming through. See if it's good. Alright. Let's see. So today, let me just change this bit right here. We're going to talk about clean architecture and aggregates. How about that? Alright. So if you were here last week, you would have seen that we started on this task of reorganizing my clean architecture solution. So clean architecture solution is a template that you can use in your Visual Studio projects. You'll find it here under github.com, Ardalis Clean Architecture. It's not meant to be a sample app, it's meant to be a starting point for a new project that you want to build and you want to get it started on the right foot. It's got a few stars, so some people are finding it useful, which I appreciate. There's some issues here. One of the issues was taking issue, if you will, with the organization of the solution. And I kind of followed a traditional Microsoft project template approach, which I'm personally not a huge fan of for real projects, but I was faced with the same issue that Microsoft has, which is they don't know what you're building. So they're going to give you some default folders that are completely agnostic to what you're building. All right, so if we look at this issue, it's talking about how to use feature folders, maybe use cases, or some other means of showing how to organize the code. Because if you look at the code here in the main branch, and it says master, but I'll change that to main here soon. For instance, look at the core. You see these are very generic types of folders that have to do with anything, right? This could be for any type of solution or project or domain, and it's not specific at all. Whereas once you start building a real system, let's say you're building an e-commerce system, maybe you've got things like products and catalog and shopping cart or things like that. Instead of having these totally generic, not C# generic, but just generic in the sense that they don't have any specific domain knowledge to them, folder names, you would probably want to use something more specific. You'd probably want to have a shopping cart aggregate folder, and in there you might have specifications for that aggregate. You might have events and handlers for that aggregate, rather than having everything kind of splayed out in these very generic top-level folders. So that's what we started on last week, and out of the box, the way this project works is, or used to work anyway, is it had a to-do item that looked like this, and we haven't really changed this at all. Probably get rid of that interface, I guess. And so a to-do item is your classic sample app fare. It's just here's a list of items, and you can check off when they're done. So to make it so that this thing would have an aggregate, which is a domain-driven design pattern, I talk about it in my Pluralsight course that I do with Julie Lerman on Pluralsight. But basically, an aggregate is a way to group together related items that should persist as a unit, right? So to facilitate that, since previously any individual to-do item you could fetch and mess around with using persistence, we created a project. And so a project is basically a group of to-do items that when they're all finished, the project is done, right? So when you define a project, you give it some name, and then it has a list of to-do items, and you can add to-do items to that list, and you can track the status of the project, and if the project has all of its items done, then it will say that it is complete. All right, so it's pretty simple. Again, it's not meant to be a sample app so much as a solution template, but it does give us something that we can use to organize the folder structure a little bit better. And so what we're going to do, we're still not done, but we're going to take all the things that are related to this project aggregate, all the events and handlers and specifications and other things in the domain model that relate to it, and we're going to group them under the project aggregate folder. So that when you use this as a template and you build something else that isn't to-do list with projects, you can use that same model and you can have an aggregate for order, and underneath order you might have order items and order events and handlers and specifications and all that good stuff for whatever is in your domain. Okay? Now, last week, in the interest of time, I cheated a little bit and I didn't fix some of the bugs that were there from the refactoring. For instance, I got rid of all the integration tests that were broken. If we look at the tests over here, we'll see. Let's go ahead and close these. These I don't think they even run because I think they don't compile at the moment. So let me just build, and we'll pick up where we left off last week and kind of finish up this this refactoring and get it merged in. And if there's any other time after that, we'll fix some other issues and do some other stuff here. We'll probably write some tests. If you're just joining, welcome, and feel free to ask any questions you have about this project, clean architecture, domain-driven design, or what have you, just in the chat. I'm following the chat, so feel free to participate. All right, so again, these were errors that we'd left last week. Easy way to get rid of stuff that you don't want to deal with right now when you're doing a big refactoring is you can just right-click on them and say exclude from project. And that's what I did last week so that I was able to compile and run the application and get other things working without having to deal with these. It's important to remember, though, to bring them back in at some point and actually fix them. So if we come in here and we start looking at the actual errors, our main problem is going to be that we got rid of being able to work with to-do items directly, and now we're working with them through a project. And so things like this repository that we're using, I changed this so that it's now a project repository, and you can see that on the signature here. It's an EF repository of T, where T is now project, and so I can't add an item to it directly. So if I want to verify that this thing works, I can add a project to it, or I can change this up and create a project and then add an item to it. But for this initial one, I think let's just test that I'm able to persist a project. So we'll say adds a project and sets its ID. And so we'll just say, I don't have a project builder, but I can say var project, if I could spell it, project equals new project. And we're going to use that. And we can give it a name, test project, I guess. And then we're going to want to pull that name out because I don't like having magic strings in my tests. But we'll get to that in a second. So we'll say project, new item. This is going to be the new project that we just added. Wait, let's see, first or default. This is not really the best test, but we'll give it a shot. And then we can assert equal here. The expected name is test project, and the item is going to be new project.name. And now right away you see here's some duplication. If I change one of these, or if I have a typo, it's not going to work. So let me change this. Make sure that ID is there. Dev Invisible says, I have a question about environments. It's a bit unrelated to what you're talking about now, but maybe have some time later to field it. Just waiting around for my daughter's cheer practice to finish. Yeah, type it up. I'll try and answer it if I can. Alright, so whenever you see these types of magic strings duplicated in here, you just want to introduce some type of variable for them. So we can say var, test project name equals test project, right? And it takes you like an extra 30 seconds, but it prevents lots of problems later. So try and do it before you check your code in. And with that, I should be able to test this. The only problem is that everything is still broken because of the compile errors. So let's keep moving on to fixing other compile errors. There's not too many left. And they're in delete, they're in update. So I could test this if I get rid of delete and update for now and exclude those back out. Let's see if that lets me build. Maybe. Alright, so let's go ahead and run this. I cloned EShop on web, then cd to source web, then run .NET run, environment development. It's not using development environment like I expected. So I assume it's using production, or it could be using test. It should use development. I think it should use development by default if you don't change it. I also tried setting ASP.NET Core environment button, or variable, but that didn't take either. Alright. Hey, look at this. My test passed. Nice. Alright, so now let's come back here. Let's do this. Let's bring these two things back in. We're going to change them the same way. So includeify Add a project. I've got eShop on web cloned here locally, so I'll tell you what, as soon as I get to a stopping point here, I'll just bring it up locally and see if I can duplicate that same problem that you're seeing, Dev Invisible. eShop on web, by the way, is using basically the clean architecture template. I created this template first, and I created the eShop on web sample, and I've been maintaining it with Microsoft for the last several years. They're not exactly the same. For one thing, I like to use the word core for my core project, and Microsoft, because they decided to name their product core, they thought that would be confusing, which I agree, but I'm not the one that named their product that silly name. So anyway, in eShop on web, it's called application core, so it's a little bit more clear. So back here, we're trying to add a project. We can get our repository, initial title, that should just be the name, right? So this is basically doing the same thing that I was doing on the other one, but now it's going to make sure it's unique. So instead of title, let's just make this name, and then we'll rename it everywhere to that. And then we're not going to have this builder. We're just going to say var project equals new project, initial name, because we're doing a delete, and control dot that. What else we got here? It works fine running from VS using IS Express, which I believe is using the launch settings. Yeah. Does it work fine from VS if you toggle the little drop down here and tell it to use the eShop on web.web project? Because that'll run it with Kestrel. That also works fine. Alright, so that means it is running fine with whatever Visual Studio is using to launch it. And you can actually see that if you go to the output. So if you do this, for instance, and then you say Control F5, it's going to show you what it's running. So there's that. So here's all my output, but this doesn't show me the command that was run. This just shows me the console output of this app. But in Visual Studio, if you want to know what Visual Studio ran to actually get that, you can go down here, and there's an output window for run, I think, maybe it's only there for IS. I'm pretty sure it's there. So the build start. There's a way to see what all it should. That's not it. I don't think this applies after the fact. None of those sound right. There definitely used to be a way in Visual Studio to see the actual .NET command that it was running, and then you could see, like, hey, if I take that .NET command and I run it myself, I should get the same behavior. I'm not seeing that in here right now. I wonder if I keep this bumped up to, let's say, detailed, and we stop this and run it again. Now it's running again, and we go back to Visual Studio, and this didn't show hardly anything, did it? Build order, build. Yeah, there's nothing here. I don't know. Alright, well, let me keep on getting this thing fixed up, and then I'll try it with actual eShop on web in a second. Alright, I did not rename project, so I've gotta do that myself. Right there. This becomes name. This I doesn't really make sense anymore. Let's just make it project. So it's real clear. Verify it's not there after I delete it. So, okay, let's try and run this. And you're going to tell me that I have to fix up the update one still. So I still got this error. No, I don't. Yeah, I do. There it is. No. Alright, so we need to fix up the update one. Same deal. Add a project. Initial name. Yeah, I screwed that up. Oh, you're not going to let me rename it now, huh? There's title. Let's try F2 rename. Is that going to work? Nope. Alright. Control dot it is. Alright, so there's that. And then item, I want that to be project. Okay. That can stay the same. This becomes just new project. Like that. We're going to add it, we're going to detach it, we're going to fetch it, we're going to say the name of the project. Can I rename that? Yes. Is that assert that this new project is not null, it's not the same as the other one, and its new name set the name. Can I do that? I'm not sure that has a thing. Project dot. Do you have an update name? You don't even have a way to do that. That's unfortunate. Let's give it an update name just for the heck of it for now. So yep, dev invisible, thank you. I'll check that out with you in a second. Alright, and then this becomes project equals new name, so update the thing, and okay, so we're going to go find the thing that has the name of new name, update the item, fetch the updated item, verify the name changed, and that's probably enough. So this is actually going to persistence and doing all these things through the repository and just verifying it works. And green check mark. Good. Alright, so if we do all the integration tests, run. Everything passes, so that's good. So let's do a commit, because it's always good to commit when everything passes. So let's say we fixed integration tests to use project instead of to do item. Commit all those. And we'll push that out. Alright, so what's left to do here? It runs. So if I control F5 it, we already saw that it does run. Here it is with an MVC view. I think I had a razor page that I wanted to use that was going to show something different than this. So I gotta see, where'd that go? Because over here in the web project I have pages and I have a to-do razor page index and it has a list of items. It shows me that. So I have to go to /to-do razor page to get to that. So then in the home index here, or no, it's this home. So this home index here had all the lists of links to all the things. And it has a controller here that was going to go to controller to populate things, but now I've moved that to the project controller. And then I also messed with this, because this should really be controller name / project ID. Alright, so let's fix this up so that my routes are good. This should really be project / I'll change how that works in a minute, but let's restart the app and make sure the correct homepage shows up now, which I think it will. Bam. Okay, so there's the one I was looking for. Now these MVC ones, I changed that controller name, so they're going to be different. So when it tries to go to /to-do / populate, it's not going to find that route, but it will find /project populate, I think. Yeah. So that might be working. Let's go back to the code and let's fix those routes up now with that new controller. So in here, let's give this a route of controller, and that means I shouldn't need this. And then this route should be get of project whack project ID, like that. And it's going to default to 1. Okay, so then in this one here should just be a get of project whack populate, and it should just return OK records added. Now that didn't seem to do what I was expecting it to do. It seemed to go here. So probably I need to give it an HTTP get that just says it is populate, and maybe this needs to be :int to restrict it. Let's try that. You may not like that route. Boom. Project ID is invalid, must be non-empty, cannot contain these things, blah blah blah. Alright, so it's the route constraints. I'll double check the syntax on this. A long time ago I was involved in writing some of this docs, but I don't remember how to combine optional and tell it it's an int. So where's that list? Here's this. So there's ID with a question mark. That's great. What if I want to make sure that that's an int? There's ID with an int. Can I do ID with an int optional? How do I do an optional int? ID : int : something else. Well, I don't really want it to be optional. Well, I guess I do because I want it to default to 1. I can make it required, but that's kind of what it is, even if I just leave it there. Alright, well, let's just see what happens if I don't make it optional. And we just say project ID : int. And try that. And that works fine. Alright, and then this still goes to the wrong place. But again, if we change it now to project populate, now it works. And it populated 0 records, which is fine. Okay, so that's good. Close that down. Let's go find all the to-do routes that are in our views. It's another reason why I don't like the server-side views as well. I suppose if we were doing this in Blazor, I'd still have to fix it though. But in home index, wherever we see to-do, this needs to now be project, and this needs to be project. To-do Razor page, that can stay. I just need to make sure those work, which I think they do. We're not using areas. Populate and index seems to be what we still called them, right? Populate, index, so that's all fine. So that should be enough. So let's build that. This thing looks like everything's going super fast, but that's just because I've got this verbosity turned up. We'll run it, and there it goes. Alright, and David Conrad says, hey man, just stopping by to tell you that both the podcast and the weekly dev tips are great. Keep it up. Alright, thank you, man. I appreciate it. Alright, so where are we at? We've got this thing now actually does what it's supposed to do. This list does not. I think because it needs to pass in the number 1, and it does if I pass in number 1. So let's just force that on the view. So we'll close this down one more time. And it's a little easier if I switch to to IS Express, because then I don't have to manually close that window every time. But in here, in the home, in the view, in here I can say ASP dash route data, ASP dash route equals 1. How do I pass that route value? I think it'll interpolate the name of it. I just haven't done that in forever. Because I want to pass it the project ID. So is it ASP dash project ID 1? Let me see if that works. without checking the docs. Nope, that did not work. All right. ASP route data. ASP route. Name of the route must be null. Blah blah blah. I want the data though. ASP route data equals additional parameters. We'll pass it a 1. Question mark data equals 1. Right, okay. ASP route dash project ID. I think that might be how it worked. There we go. Look at that, it works. All right, cool. List to-do items, that should really be for a project though, right? And it's actually no longer just to-do items, it's actually the whole project. So let's change what the actual text of these things says. So load sample project with to-do items, and then list project and its to-do items. There we go. And then let's just verify this is load sample project with, and this is list. I guess it should really be show project. That's good. And this is the same show project and it's okay. Now that's not going to work, I don't think, with that route, but let's try it. Okay, this one is still good. This one is still good. This one is still swagger. Not sure about that. That doesn't look very good. Let's figure that one out. Load sample, that worked. Going to to-do razor page. I probably want to change the name of that, but that's alright. Show project, working. I must be hard coding to 1 somewhere. And then list the incomplete ones, that's all of them. So that's working. Okay. So now let's have a quick look at the razor page index page. It doesn't have a route here, but it should. So I need to map a project ID to that. And then there's my hard-coded number 1 there. So I want to say something like public int project ID gets set. And then over here I can say something like project ID, maybe? Does it have to be a thing, has to be in quotes. Project ID, and we'll give it a capital just so it matches. Don't need that. But then over here, if that's been set, I should be able to use that there. And it should all still work. So now if I go to do razor page, show project, it ought to work, but it doesn't. That route just totally doesn't work. Page equals to do razor page index, and that's because I didn't pass it any route data here, so it won't match it. So I need to go back to my home page view. Get out of the way. Is that this one? This one. And I need to basically add some kind of route data to this. ASP dash page data, maybe? Or is it still route data? Route dash project ID equals 1. Let's try that. And refresh this. And try that. That's still not working. I shouldn't need to rebuild this. Alright, rebuilt. Let's reload. And there it goes. Alright, so that's almost working. Why are we getting a null ref? Because project or items is nothing. So line 28. Let's go back over here. This is weird. This should be linked to this. That's weird. These are in the wrong place. Index.cshtml, index.cshtml. Visual Studio's got a bug or something here. These tree things are not lined up like they should be. Anyway, line 28 is there. And it says to do items equals that. We may as well set this to be something if it's not set. But now here, this project says go get me this by this spec, and I'm guessing this came back null. If it's null, we should probably return a 404, so let's try that. If project equals null, return not found. Is it not found result, or it's because there's no await and this is a task? No, there's my await right there. So what is your problem? Let's see. How do you return a not found from a razor page handler? Error page, error page. Should just be return not found, right? That's what I had. Like that. But now you're not happy. Because it's async, right? Since this is returns a task, return must not be followed by a thing. Do you return task of T? I guess. Task of what? Action result? I don't think that's what I want. Razor pages, razor pages. I'm looking at the docs real quick to see how they do this, because I don't recall off the top of my head. Return the page, return redirect page. What about not found? They don't like not found. Not found is not a thing. Alright, so we just won't do that. That's more of a API type of thing anyway, I guess. So I guess if to do items is null, we would just tell it in the page that we didn't find any. But we still have to do something here. So I could have a message that I said or something. But I need to know if that thing's null that we should blow up or something. So yeah, let's create a message. Public string message get set. Alright, we have a message. Alright, so now if project equals null, then message equals no project found. Return. Is that going to work? That's going to work. Alright, so now I can go back to my page, and I can say blah blah blah. This will be a project. And this is going to look a lot like this one over here. I won't give it the name and the items. Name items, but only if the message is empty. So we'll say if model dot message if it's not that, we'll say h1 at model.message. Why are you not happy? Okay. H1's probably a bit much. Let's do H2. Okay. Otherwise, I hate using else blocks like this, but otherwise do all this. That's not name, that is name. Oh, it's not name. I don't have a project. That's why it's not happy. So my index model doesn't have a name because it's not a project. What did I do over here? I said give it a project DTO. So I think I should do the same thing here. And instead of the list of to-do items, I should just say public project DTO project get set. Get rid of that. Reference that. And how did I do that mapping before? So create me a DTO like that. And put it in here. And if project is null, we won't do this, but otherwise we'll say is this DTO. And instead of varring it, we'll just say project equals new DTO with all these things. Don't need that anymore. And then in our page, we're going to do model.project.name, right? Index model does not, okay, it's just being slow. Alright, and then this is project.items. Cool. And let's see if that builds. And dev invisible, are you still even here? You're still here. Alright, I'll get to your question in 1 second. Alright, let's run this. See how close we are to it working. It still says no project found. Alright, so for some reason that passing in a 1 to my project ID is not working. So what did I do wrong there? This ought to be a route attribute. Razor pages. Just Google it. Razor pages route parameters. Routing in Razor pages. So here's what people on the internet say we want to do. Route data, route templates, a page, and then title, whatever. Alright, where do these things go? Accessing those variables. They're stored in a dictionary. Route data values title. Okay, so it doesn't automatically get set. Is that what you're telling me? To do this, you can add a public property with suitable parameter. Oh, right. Okay, so that has to be on there, or I have to use the attribute on the bind property supports get equals true. That's what I want. So that's what I'm missing. All right, so I either have to pass in the project ID here on get async, where it will do model binding, or I need to use this attribute. And in this case, I think I'll use the attribute. So this should bind it, and that should give me a project ID. And let's try it one more time. Oh, you're not happy. Why are you not happy? Alright, so now it's loaded. And let's put this where people can see it. And we're trying to get this one to work, to do razor page /1. And it works! Yes! Alright, so mission accomplished. We can close that down. This is all good. Let's go ahead and commit getting to razor page versions of project working. Commit. Alright, now let's go look at EShop on web real quick. So I'm going to go to a new folder and we'll go dev Scratch. I already have EShop on web, but let's create a new one. PowerShell. So I'm in my Scratch folder, which is where I mess around with stuff. And let's go over here. Let's go find EShop on the web and grab this and grab this and copy that. Alright, so we're going to clone this. We'll say git clone that, and we'll call it April Twitch EShop on web. And it's going to pull it all down, which gives me a chance to grab a drink of water. Now we're going to CD into it, and we're going to open it. And I'm told that it works just fine in Visual Studio, but I want to verify that it works before I test it at the command line. So we're in here. I think I've got this thing working to where when it first loads, it'll actually do the right thing if you just say Control F5. So let's see what happens. Thanks for the follow, Egil Hansen. So project only had Kestrel prod environment. Alright, so this shows web as the startup project. So in here, it's still spinning, it's still loading. I've got 17 Visual Studios running, so it's slow. But now let's run it. And wait for it. Here it goes. We have a store. Now, is that store running in prod or dev? Who knows? Probably it says somewhere here at the top when it started. There's a lot of output. iExpress is running, registration. It's the seed data. Is there a search in here? Yeah, I think it would normally say somewhere in here running in environment development. But I'm not seeing it. It should be an info log message. If we do go over here and we look at the properties launch settings, we should see that by default for IIS Express, we're going to say environment variables development. But honestly, I don't see a way to tell right now. And then this one, web prod, is supposed to be in production. So if I go here and I say use web prod, then it should run in production. And what will that mean different? How will we know? Well, we'll see if it prints it out to the output. So everything looks the same here. Nothing on the page says it's in production environment. And there's nothing here either saying it that I can see. So I guess my first question is, I don't really have 17 Visual Studios. I have a few. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is number 6. That's only 6. Okay, in-memory store implies dev. Alright, well how do I know I'm using in-memory store? I guess would be the other question. So, let's see. No. Where'd PowerShell go? Alright, so you want to do cd source web, and then in cd source web do .NET run -- environment development. This is what you really want me to see from terminal. Okay. Six means I'm doing work. That's right. Ironically, I mean, it's not Visual Studio that chews up memory. It's all Chrome. Anytime I go look at and see my memory use, you know, Visual Studio, these are nothing. Chrome, 105 processes, 4200. And that's because Discord is Chrome and Slack is Chrome, and I have like 5 different browsers with 10 different tabs each that are all Chrome, and so Chrome just goes nuts. VS Code is Chrome. Like, it's all Chrome. So yeah, it's a little crazy. Yeah, and Teams. Teams is also chewing up resources. Alright, so this thing ran, but it looks a lot like what happened when we ran in production, doesn't it? So I believe you. It seems like that might be running in production. Let's see what happened to my log message. That should have said how it was running. So in here, there's usually a message somewhere that just says that it's running in whatever thing. You don't even see those warnings. You see database exceptions. Okay. Well, I already have the database on mine, so maybe that's why. What is the database for app settings JSON? It's going to be Microsoft EShop, that. So if I go here, local DB, that's not even the right one. Refresh. I don't want v13, I want MS SQL local DB. Huh. Okay. Local DB, MS SQL local DB connect. Usually it just shows up. Databases, Microsoft, EShop on web, so delete this, close, okay. Delete this, close, okay. So now we have no databases. If we look at development, it doesn't have anything as far as connection strings go, but that's where we said in startup, in configure development, we're going to say use in-memory services. There's no reason why we shouldn't log stuff here, so let's just do that. Let's just add an iLogger. And I could do an iApp logger, but it doesn't know what that is yet. Does it? No. So I want just iLogger of startup. Logger. Use the extensions logging. Set it to a field. And then come down here. Configure in-memory database. We'll just say logger.log using in-memory database. And logger.log is not what I want, so I want log information, like that. Log production services says using real SQL server database. Alright. And somewhere in here I can also check to see if I'm in development, like right here. This thing still has a logger, so when it's wiring all that up, I could also say here, configuring middleware for development. And we'll see if these log messages actually show up, because they may not. I may be being naive and thinking that these will actually work, but let's try it. Production, or at least not dev. Right. The DI won't work, it's still not configured at this stage. It could be, depending on which one of these default things I'm doing. So if I do a builder here, this configure web host defaults is supposed to wire up a logger. If it's not, I can always do it here if I need to. But let's try it as is and see if you're right. You're almost always right, so I'm thinking you're probably going to be right this time too. And here we go. Invalid operation, cannot resolve, logging, logger, blah blah blah. In startup, so yeah, what you said. So I need to configure logging here. Host, default builder, configure web host defaults. Do I do it here, .configure logging? So I know there's one of them that configures a console logger. Configure web host defaults, configures console logger. It used to be a thing anyway. So in here, if we go look at the docs, which change every time there's a new version, it says if you use a generic host, you call it create default builder, it adds these providers. So I want to say create default builder, do that, right? So if I look at that and I compare it to my code here, right, create default builder, where'd my code go? Create default builder, configure web host defaults, but that looks the same to me. So why is this not there? Is it just that it's not ready at this stage? Is that what you're saying? Because that's, let's try if I just configure here. Let's do this. Because this should run first. and give me a console logger for startup, right? Let's try it. No. You're telling me the constructor in startup is not called through IOC. Activator, constructor, matcher, create instance. I know I've done this in the past. It's called manual event internal call. Alright, well, assuming one or the other of these ways logging is being wired up, I don't really need it in the constructor. I just need it somewhere. So when we enter into configure services, let's make this bigger. In the configure services, I can set the logger. So instead of trying to pass it in here, we'll get that out of there, get that out of there. That won't really help. Let's just say underscore logger equal in configure services. How do I resolve a logger here? It's really not a good thing. You know what? Let's just not use the logging that I was going to add in configure services, because that's going to be a pain. But I can easily inject a logger into configure, right? Because that's going to get called after all the services are configured. Yeah? So in here, what do you think? Right, I have to use iService collection, but I'd also have to create a service provider in order to get required service iLogger of T. Right, David Conrad. So I think I need to do, if I want to just let it be injected, I think I can do it here. And then I don't even need. Okay, you're happy now. So just we use method injection. Let's try this. It used to be easier to inject a logger into startup. I swear I've done it through the constructor before, but it's not working for me right now, obviously. In configure, you can use it at that stage services are configured. Right. So, bam. It's not happy though, because it said here what? Really all I want to do is print out whether or not we're in development or not. Fatal error occurred. Is this the error that you're getting, dev invisible? Fail connection, error connection, catalog DB on server. That's what you get. Okay, well, here's what I get. Same thing. Because you have not run it before, so there's a need to do a migrations database update. Is that the one? Let's see. Let's go back to EShop on web. Read the README. Does it tell us that we need to create the database somewhere? Run the sample. After splitting, you should be able to run it within memory. Right. If you wish to run it with a persistent database, you'll need to run the migrations. You need to do that. Okay, but you want to be able to pass it in the environment and have it work, right? You don't want to have to do this. That doesn't even show you how to do it. Yeah, the docs don't even show you the .NET EF database update. No, they do. This is it. This is what you need. Okay, so if you want to use the production database, you have to do that. But that's not what you want at all. What you want is you want to be able to run this stupid thing from the command line and have it not blow up, because it should be running in development. So if we go back to my command line and we do this, I should get the same error because it's still going to be running in production. Boom. Okay, so that looks correct that I got the error. And so you're not crazy. You want to use in memory, just like in Visual Studio, but it's not working. So let's figure that out. Pass environment to .NET run. Pretty sure you're doing that right already, but let's go look. We go to Andrew Locke's blog here, where he says that you can do a .NET run, and it'll tell you right here. That's what I'm missing. Why isn't it saying that? Hosting environment. Okay, that used to always just appear, and now it's not. Setting it at the command line, you can do that, and you tried that, you said. It used to work in older commits. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so something's changed with .NET 5. So success, do it in PowerShell, right, use Windows control, right, there's a bunch of different ways to set the environment variable. We want to just pass it in as an argument. So you can set it here, you can set it here, right, that's working. You can set it there, you can set it in launch.json, command R. Okay, so in configuration builder, depending on how you've configured web host builder, you may be able to specify environment by finding command line arguments. Do so, you need to use configuration builder uses add command line extension from blah blah blah. Isn't that already used in the default one though? I thought it was. So dash environment staging works like that. So if I add command line manually to the configuration builder, config, use configuration config, that should work. But I shouldn't need to do that because I'm using, let's come back here, let's go look at program.cs. Program.cs says, so I don't think I need that anymore, it says we're going to use a create default builder, and it says right here what it does. It says set iHost environment to this, configuration, right, so right there it says load host configuration from supplied command line args, so it should work, right, according to this. And also says configure the log refactory to log to the console, debug, and event source. So it says it should do all the things that I thought it was doing. Okay, so why isn't it actually doing it? Did I break it somewhere here? Because here's the args. And I took those args and I passed them in to create host builder, and it got those args and I passed those into there, so they're there, right? And I can do a console write line got these args. Is that even gonna work? I'm hoping it'll just figure it out and print them out, but I bet it won't. It's going to blow up and say, I can't parse a string array into a... Yeah, that didn't work. Let's just do a string.join. Incidentally, this will tell us what is being passed. Syntax, comma, oh right. Okay, this will tell us what args Visual Studio is passing. So, boom. You would think console write line would figure out how to parse a string array, right? Alright, so got these args. Absolutely nothing. Okay. Well, let's see what happens when I run it from my PowerShell. Yeah, there it was. Alright, so it got the args, -- environment, and I lost it. But it got the whole thing. So it got these args, the whole thing, okay, as one thing. So parsing it happens somewhere else. -- environment development. It is -- environment space the thing, right? And it got -- environment comma development. So not quite the same thing, but maybe it's going to parse it correctly. Alright, Dev Invisible. Time is up. Watch this video later. Alright. Well, glad to hear that practice is over and you survived cheer practice. I don't know if I'm going to get this sorted out for you, but it is an interesting problem. I want to check it out. When you get back to the office and you see this, do me a favor and file an issue on EShop on web, and we'll definitely track it down. But I'm going to switch back over to the clean architecture stuff for now. Alright, so let's ditch EShop on web for the moment. Alas, not sure why it's behaving like that. I agree, it seems to be something new with .NET 5, because that didn't used to work like that. And we're back to this. So what's left to do to organize this better from a use cases or aggregate perspective? And what that means is up here, if we close all the things and we just look at the core, right, we want this to be more relevant to the types of things we're doing in this particular project. So in this particular application, the thing we're doing is we're managing projects and to-do lists. So this project aggregate is like the main thing that we care about. And inside of it, it has various entities like project, project status, and to-do item. But it could also now have events and other things that relate to that. So in to-do item, when this is marked complete, it adds an event for this to-do item completed event. You could imagine we might have a project completed event as well at some point. We don't yet, but we could. So right now that event lives over here, this to-do item completed event, and it's just inheriting from base event and has a little bit of information there. That event should really be part of the aggregate. So I could just take it and drop it into this folder, and it could sit side by side with everything else. Or I could put it in a subfolder. I would rather put it in a subfolder, even though for now there's only one thing there. But just to make it more useful to have that separate thing, let's fix the namespace, core project aggregate dot events, and then let's add another one just so there's two there. To item completed event, let's do new item added event and put that there, and we'll give it a item, and we may as well give it the project too. Alright, and this new item added event takes in the item and the project and assigns those things. We'll put that into its own type, its own file, and there's that. Alright, so now we've got handlers also. Now these handlers don't necessarily go with the aggregate every time, but I think they probably could in this case. This is no longer a thing. Let's take the handlers and move them in there too, just to further show that this is all project aggregate related stuff. And the idea with this aggregate organization is that if you're a developer and you're working on some functionality that has to do with how projects and to-do items are organized, you shouldn't have to leave this folder for the most part, right? All the important things are in here. So in here, we're going to further say that this is in the project aggregate namespace, and that should magically let it find some of these things as soon as I give it that. All right. And we could probably add a handler for a new item added event, but for now that's just left as an exercise for the reader. But when you add an item here, we could do the creation of it. So we could say var new item added event equals new item added event, control dot namespace open this comma new item. Why are you not happy? Could not find the namespace. That's not the namespace. That's the namespace. There we go. And then we just add that to my list of items. Items.add new item added event, like that. Alright, so now we add that event. You're not happy why? Enumerable to do item does not contain a route definition for add. What? Oh, that's the wrong items. It should have been events. Events.add. There we go. Alright. Let's try and build. Close. This thing no longer has that namespace, and instead it needs that namespace. Now it's happy. Alright, so if we look at this structure now, it's got specifications still separate, and services, and those could also be related to that aggregate potentially. Let's take the specs and put them in there. Alright, so if we move specifications in here, then they're going to have the same project aggregate thing applied to them. And then we just have to do a bunch of using statement fixes. Much harder to do with one hand. All right. Get rid of it. Alright, still a couple left. And this one's still hard-coded. This should really be pulling it in from the route. Add a to-do for that. Same with this one. Oh, I got rid of these too, didn't I? Yeah, show files. I gotta fix those yet. Okay, so we're not quite done. Happy New Year. Really? It's April. LTNS. What's LTNS? Long time no see. Got it. See, quick. Perhaps I haven't seen you this year. That would explain the Happy New Year. Good to see you again, Surly Dev. So, I'm quick, aren't I? Alright, I think we got everything building. Yeah? But I did notice that my endpoints are not working. And also, a bunch of tests are failing. Yeah. Alright. Moving around these namespaces is just a little bit painful. So let's go in here, let's fix up this handler. And let's fix up this event namespace. And let's go over here and do the same thing. Where's the event? New stream time. Yeah, I decided to push it a little bit later. I've been trying it for a few weeks. This way I don't have to try and fit in any actual work after this, so I can just be done for the day and go home. Hey Steve, off-topic question. Yeah, those are okay. How do you implement validation in your domain? How do you communicate validation errors to its users in D2D projects? That's a good question. There's different types of validation. There's simple things like guard clauses, which I probably have some in here. So let's go look at our domain for a second. And so let's say we have a to-do item. It doesn't have any guard clauses. How about a project? Also none. Okay, so let's use a guard clause here to show this. All right, so we would say guard dot against I can never remember where the parens go on these. Dot null or empty, and then this is the thing. And what guard clause is this? Alright, so this is name of name. I got it backwards. I always get it backwards. Name of name. Alright, so there's validation for you. Name can't be null or empty. That just goes right into domain, right? Oh, and I was already doing one here. Alright, so when you go to add an item, the item can't be null. These are really easy to unit test against, and there's actually a new version of this guard clause that lets you do this in a one line. So you can say name equals that, and it works. So it doesn't take up twice as many lines to do those checks, which is nice. Of course, if we're going to do that, we're going to let you update the name here. We should do the same check. So we'll take this and make sure that we also check it there. New name. Like that. Alright. Now, what about business invariants and aggregate level things and things that involve multiple entities, he says. Like, I don't know, let's say that there's some crazy thing like, imagine there's a max number of items rule for a project, let's say. I'm a big fan of using Fluent validation for that kind of thing. So I would import Fluent validators. I would have the validations be part of this aggregate as far as where they lived in the folder. And I would put a Fluent validator of T, of project, on there. And I would have it check and make sure that the project was valid. If you needed to actually run some validity check in this aggregate itself, which sometimes you do, I would have it take in the validator as an argument, typically. Or even just have it as a private thing that it just news up, because usually the Fluent validators, you can just new them up. So it does a good job of keeping it out, the functionality and the rules out of the entity itself, but then the entity can still get to it. So I don't think I have Fluent validators in here currently, but we could try it real quick. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but let's give it a shot real quick. So we'll go in here and we'll say manage NuGet packages. And let's say projects can't have more than 5 to-do items on them. Right, we're going to keep our projects small. So come over here, I'll say Fluent validation. Here, we don't need ASP.NET Core for in the core project. And this has gotten really slow lately, I don't know why. Go out to NuGet and do a search and it's like, bam, instant. Try and search it from Visual Studio and it's meh, we'll get to it someday. There it is. Alright, so let's install Fluent validation. Preferred Fluent validators over data annotation. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of data annotation in my model. I'll use data annotation in my UI layer where the UI the input is actually happening. But I don't like to put it too much in my model. And I never use my model in the UI layer. So which I really need to show in this thing too, because I am doing that in these samples, which I shouldn't be. But again, this is supposed to be a solution template, not a sample app. So I'm trying to keep it small. So I don't know. Let's come in here and let me bring up Fluent validation docs here, just so I can see what their API looks like. So Fluent validation, if you're not familiar with it, it looks something like this. Here's the docs. Imagine, if you will, that you have a customer class and you want to validate it with an abstract validator of customer instance. Well, then inside of your constructor, you're going to have a rule for your customer, and it will have some thing on the end of it that tells what the rule is. And then when you want to run that, you can check to see if it's valid. And you can say, give me some validation results by validating this customer, and then if it's not valid, show me what the errors are, right? So let's see if we can do that in this code. So we're going to say public class project validator colon, and I think it was abstract validator of T. Is that what it was? Abstract validator of T of project. Now, since it's abstract, it has various things you have to implement, so we can control that and say implement and see if there is anything. just the constructor, it looks like. If we look back here, we're going to say rule for something something. So we can, maybe we don't trust our guard clause, so let's do a rule for project such that project dot name and is not null. Right, that's one rule. But we could also say rule for project. There's a way to chain these. Project dot items dot count dot less than dot what? Or are you not happy? Dot must what? I'm not an expert at Fluent validators. Keeping domain objects clean. We follow up on your chat. Are you exposing the Fluent validation rules outside the domain, or preference with regard to validation on more of an architectural level? Typing on the phone. Yeah, I like to keep the validation in the domain. Whether or not it gets exposed, I'm not really dogmatic about. I don't really care. So if there's a reason why it makes sense for you to expose the validation logic at the application service layer, or even at the UI layer where you're going to use it with your model validator, you certainly could. My main thing is I want to have it be modeled in the domain, because I think those validation rules are business logic. They are domain rules, so they belong in the domain layer. And they shouldn't be in the entity itself if you can avoid it, because it just adds bloat, it just adds responsibilities. All right, so if you're trying to follow a single responsibility principle, you want to keep the validation logic in its own separate class that's responsible for just the validation. And yeah, if I were better at this, I would know how to say that something has to be less than 5, but how do you do that? I'm going to punt on this unless somebody from the chat wants to tell me how to do that. Let's do it, just Google. Fluent validation property less than X. Built-in validator. Not null, not empty, not equal, blah blah blah, equal. What about length? Length, okay. But length works on a string. I want to say max length also works on a string. Less than, there we go, dot less than. I thought I tried that. Dot less than. I'm going to type it out even though you're not giving it to me on IntelliSense. Less than 6. But you're still not happy. 1, 2, 1, 2. I don't have any 1, 2, 1. Yeah, my parens all match up. What are you saying? Type arguments, rule 4, cannot be inferred from the usage. I find it kind of weird that the domain object would not encapsulate its own business rules. Well, the domain object can still be using those business rules even if and encapsulate them, even if they're in a different class, right? And I'll show you that in a second. So if I can figure out why this isn't working. Rule 4 project. I mean, is it just the fact that I'm trying to do rule 4 twice? Because that shouldn't matter. You're still not happy. Project.items. Is it because I need to have link? Because it's not enumerable? That must be what it is. Now it's happy. Alright, so now we've got this project validator. This is basically just a stateless class, right? It has no dependencies. So if I want to have some kind of validation on here that I would check before I would, save it or something, I could say public bool, is valid for save. And it could just new up one of those validators, or it could have a private one that it sets in here. So, up here I could say private project validator underscore validator equals new one of those, right? Equals new. Use the new syntax, right? And then this could just be return project validator. No, return validator. That's what I called it. Return validator. Do it. Dot is valid. No, dot validate this. this. There. So that's how you would do it, right? This is now encapsulated. And this doesn't return a bool. This returns a list of validation thingies, but I can give it a .count or whatever. What's the syntax on that? How do I actually validate something? Create your first validator, and then is valid. Contains the result comes back and has an is valid. All right, so dot is valid. There we go. All right, so this would work. Okay, so the model now exposes validation if that's something you want it to do, but we're still following solid because this is now in its own separate class that's responsible for it. But who knows about that? Well, it's private, so it's fully encapsulated. So later on, if you want to change how you do validation, you can totally change it. Now, if you don't want other people to be able to get to this, well, that's fine. Then just make this internal. And now it's not exposed outside of here, so no one else can get to it. All right, and so then you're saying, as long as you don't allow your domain objects to get into an invalid state, that means the means of protection is up to you. Sure, yeah. So if I wanted to use this thing in, say, my constructor, I could, right? I probably wouldn't, because I don't like to instantiate other things in my constructor. I'm okay with a guard clause because that's just a static. It's basically like an extension method. But I probably wouldn't create a whole separate class with a whole library and everything around it in there. Even though at their heart, these things are doing very similar things, guard clauses and validators. But I want to have it encapsulated, so I do this, but I want it to be in a different class, so I put it in a different class. All right, sounds like we agree. Perfect. I'm going to rip this back out. Maybe we'll add it again someday, but for now we'll pull it out. And one thing I will point out, valid, right? Valid is a very tricky thing. A lot of developers think that you can just throw an isValid method on an entity in a model and call it a day and say, well, we'll just check if it's valid. But you have to say what it's valid for, right? Valid has context. So if you just want to say, like, this article is valid, valid for what? Valid to save it? Valid to publish it? Valid to move it to the next stage in the workflow? There's different rules that are involved at different stages of a workflow for many things, right? When you create a new order, it might need certain fields in order to be valid. But before you can process that order, maybe it needs additional fields, right? Maybe it needs payment provider. Maybe it needs the payment result from the credit card to know that it actually was paid for. All right, and then we can actually fulfill the order, right? So what does valid mean if you just have an is valid? And so it's important when you do this type of modeling in your domain model that you are clear about what context that validation is in, what operation it's for, and not just, globally, is it valid? All right, so let's get all that out of there. Let's come back here and rip this back out of here. Exactly, valid depends on the life cycle. In my test, the system under test with the domain object and that test would validate the business rules. Right, the nice thing about pulling validation into its own class is that you can write unit tests for just that class, right? And then you don't have to try and test something through something else. Because imagine that I wanted to do some work in here, and so it's like, well, after I add the item, then I want to check if it's valid, in here, right? And so now if I want to do any checks for my validation rules, I also have to get through all this work of creating the item and doing the guard clause and whatever else. And this could be a lot, right, before I ever get to the line of code that actually calls my validation. So if I can pull that validation logic out into its own method, into its own class, that I can then unit test independently, then my tests get a lot simpler. They require less setup. They're a lot less brittle, right? If this other stuff here changes, it's not going to break my test because my test is now only hitting the validation. When there's a validation error, do you just throw, or do you have the domain-specific exception, or use FV exception, FV fluent validation exception? I have a few different approaches for that. I think I have result in here. So one option is you can use results. So I have a result, an example for that is on here. So here's a service, and this is purely in here to demonstrate how you would use a result return type. And so what this thing returns and it's crazy with the generics here, with 3 of them nested in, but it returns a task, because it's async, of result, which is my result abstraction, of the thing it's actually going to return when it works. So when it works, it returns the list of items, right? When it doesn't work, it returns result.error with the list of the error messages. That's if it actually blows up, right? And so this is just taking the exception and dropping it in here. What if it's invalid? Well, if it's invalid, it would get this list of validation errors, and it could return a result.invalid with the errors. Now, if you use this result abstraction, which is another NuGet package I have, then it's really easy to map this to an API endpoint, which I don't think I have, but I really should. Do I have a search? I don't have a search. So I need to put a search endpoint in here to show that. Because then when you hit the search endpoint, it's like one line of code to map this result of T to an HTTP response type of, not found or invalid model or whatever you want. Okay. As to whether or not validation errors in general should throw exceptions or return validation error result collections or things like that, that's totally up to you. If it's an error in your system that this would ever happen, then I think it should be an exception. So in my application, when I create a project, I expect that I will always, always, always pass it in a valid name. If there's ever a time inside my application where I would somehow try and create a project and it didn't pass it a valid name, then that should just blow up immediately, right? That's a programmer level exception. The application is not working right, blow up. But what if it's not that, right? What if it's just not valid for an operation, right? Like we were just talking about. Like maybe this project is not valid for assigning to someone unless it has at least one item, right? So you can't pass around a project with no items on it and assign it to someone because they have no work to do, let's say. Okay, so I could have a valid for method that says valid for assignment, and it just returns back, item count greater than 0, or something, right? That's just a Boolean, right? Whether or not it's valid for that operation, it's true or it's false. So it depends. It depends on the operation. It depends on what should happen when that condition arises, whether it's exceptional at the application level or it's just a behavior you need to handle in the logic of the application. Hopefully that helps. All right, so we are still trying to finish up our refactor because I forgot I had all these endpoints. And they probably still have functional tests that went with them, if I remember right. Maybe? Maybe not. Maybe they should, though. They probably ought to. Okay, so let's go over here and let's just make these all suddenly appear. Include in project. And I'm just going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to say this is really going to be a bunch of project endpoints. So here's a project endpoints like that. And we're going to say here's a create, and this is going to have a new project request. It's going to have a new project response, and it's going to have a repository of project. And we're going to see why I didn't do this last week, because it's just going to be a lot of tedious changes. But when it works, it's going to be awesome. Repository project, blah, blah, blah. It's going to go to /projects, maybe. Is that going to be the same as this one? This one's just /project, so it should be okay. So that's okay. Now where is that new project request? Well, that's going to be right here. New project request. And it's required that it has a name. And I'm probably going to want to have a new to-do item request at some point also. So I'm going to regret changing this, but it's okay. They're easy to create. JoSuave83 says, I usually throw exceptions if the validation isn't exposed in the visible logic, like if validation is happening as part of a pipeline or middleware. Yeah, if nobody can do anything about it and your only thing that you're able to do is blow up and stop the process, then exceptions work great. Whereas if the user is actively interacting and you can present back to them some information so they can then try again, then an exception might be overkill. Okay, so there's that, and then I also want to copy this, not that many times, one copy. And I called this a new to-do item response, create dot new project response. And Visual Studio's chaining is broken. I don't know why. If this is a bug in the latest version or if I just have to restart it. Let me try restarting it. It's weird because these are not chaining right. These are not chaining right. Well, I'm going to restart. I like that the domain can be asked, is this okay? Let me see. Create that. And it can answer yes, no for those things where there are complex business rules which we don't want replicated in app-level services. But if a name can never be null, I agree that those types of things should throw because that is data validation that should have happened before the domain was invoked. Yep, that's how I think about it. Look at that, still broken. So normally, let me show you what this should look like. Normally, if you go to github.com, like Ardalis, API endpoints, there, I have evidence that shows what it's supposed to look like right here. So it should look like this, and you should be able to expand these things so that you just see the endpoint, and then if you expand it out, you see its request and its response that go with it. And it used to work, right? I have proof it used to work. But for some reason right now, it's not. And I don't know why. But we'll get there. New project response, endpoints dot project, I guess, for all these things. Do item. Oh, it needs a new name, doesn't it? Alright, so getting just this endpoint to work. So far I need that aggregate. Need some namespaces. I don't want to generate it. I want you to use the one that's literally right here. New project response. Public class, no, that should be response. There's the problem. I don't need that anymore. Did I screw those up? Alright, but then this wants to have an ID on it as well, so I can fetch it next time with the ID. Alright, so then that's good. That goes away. The create endpoint now works. Alright, so then I want to go to repository of project, and you should be using it's already there. Right there, project aggregate. Okay, so new project request goes here. New project response goes here. No. Sometimes have VS make files read only if a refactoring crashes and a restart fixes it. Yep. I've had issues with 2019 and file nesting. Yeah, me too. Click on the stairs like button this. Look at Viceni with all the answers. Standard settings, default. Okay, so you can do this. File nesting is disabled. I swear I never clicked on that. I wonder if that got set somewhere in a editor config or something setting. Maybe somebody else checked that in and I didn't catch it with the pull request, but I don't see it. I don't see an editor config in here. But Viceni, you got it, man. Alright, so thank you. In here, we want to create a new project, which is a new project, and you just take in request.name. So that gets a little shorter. And then created item, that can stay that way. Repository to add new project. Now, why are you like that? Oh, because I was stupid and I named this thing the wrong thing. There's a reason why you never name your folders and your namespaces the same as your entities. So we'll call that projects, or we'll call it project endpoints, even though that's verbose and stuff. But endpoints, project endpoints. That gets rid of these stupid errors where the namespace gets in the way. But I do have to now change it here and here. But we're making progress. Alright, so right now, fluent validation error. I got rid of fluent validation. That's why. Alright, those are all the other endpoints. So this one is good to go. So we could test it with this one if I got rid of the other ones. But let's do the other ones real quick. So let's take this namespace and apply it to each of these. Alright, and then delete doesn't really do a whole lot, so that's pretty easy. With request of int, without response, give me iRepository of project for those things. It's delete projects whack and your projects. Alright, good. Now eventually I will turn this into a constant so it's not a magic string in here. And then this deletes a project, so fix that one, that one, that one, that one, and okay, item to delete, item to delete, so this is nice because this doesn't have any bearing on the entity that I'm talking about, so it just works. So alright, 4 errors, 17 errors, but they're going to be these other endpoints. So get by ID, response for this, I guess we'll do a project response with request of int. I'm tempted to change that to be a project request, but we'll call it project response and leave it as int for now. So I'll take this one, come in here, and instead of to-do item response, this becomes just project response, which brings back the name, and eventually it needs to bring back the items, but we're going to leave that out for now. Project response needs to have the same namespace. There's that and that. Project, 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 project. Come on, Visual Studio, keep up. It's thinking about it. Alright, this is stupid. You're supposed to be saving me time. Alright, that all looks right. project response, get the item, response equals this. This becomes name equals name. If we wanted to, we could add automapper, but I don't want to have that be necessarily in here by default for everybody that wants to use this template. So for now, I'm just mapping it myself. And I think that one's about done. Yep. So now we're on to list. List is in project endpoints. It returns a list of to-do item response. I really don't like that, so I'm going to fix that. I think it should return a project list response. Let's say project list response. And a project list response is going to be a new type. Here, which is going to have a list of project DTOs, which I can just create in here. But it's really a new project response, so it's just the name. But if I had a full-on DTO, that wouldn't be a bad thing. So let's create one of those. In fact, let's create it here. So public class project DTO just has a public int ID, get set, and this could be a record type, couldn't it? Let's try using a record. Isn't there some fancy new syntax we can use for this? I'm being checked by the mods. What does that mean? I don't have any mods. Alright, so to create a record type, we can do public record that, right? So that's all I need. It's in parentheses. So this just becomes int ID string name. Bam. That's my whole DTO. Now how do I say that that's the DTO without the project, without the tasks? Or do I even want it to be without the tasks? Could I pass in an array of tasks? Project DTO, I want to say it's like simple or something. Alright, project list response. This will not include all of the to-do items, so this will just be a public list of projects get set equals new, like that. Okay. Used up my daily quota of questions. Had a message block saying it was being checked by mods, perhaps a bot. Huh. I have some random stream element stuff going, so maybe there's something in there. I don't know. Were you swearing a lot? Let's see. So then this we want to throw to a different file, and then to get this to nest, we want it to be in the list dot project list response. There we go. What about that DTO? Well, that DTO can go into its own type, and that's fine for it to be separate, because I think I'm going to reuse that in other places. Like this new project response and request? No, just response. New project response really could just inherit from. Are you allowed to inherit from records? I can't remember. Project DTO, is that allowed? If it is allowed, what are you going to tell me? Do I have to give you a constructor? Constructor takes 0 arguments. So I can do something like ctor colon base. I think I'm trying to mix too many things here. I'm trying to introduce records. So we'll keep that DTO for now and see if it works with the list, but I'm not going to mess it anywhere else. Yeah, exactly. Viceni's cautioning me that I'm going to be using records everywhere. It's kind of like async. It starts to spread. So we'll try them here and see if this works. This should be list of project DTO now. That's what I meant to say. Now my list gets a response. These are all project. I've got about 15 minutes to try and finish getting this thing working. So this becomes a project list response. That should just work. There we go. Alright. Items equals select new project list response. Like this. And it's going to have a list of projects equal new list of project DTO. I still don't have the item. Guess I should create the DTO out here. Var response DTO equals new project list response. Select item is just going to be new project DTO item dot ID item dot name. So there's my list of items, which could just be response DTO dot projects equals select each project like that, and then this just needs a dot toList on it. Return response DTO. Just call it response. Sometimes filter picks up weird words, sometimes nothing offensive. And the name of the package we have, an upkeg is apparently a bad word on Twitch. Yeah, I am using Chatty for this, and I don't see it. I wonder if the Twitch tooling would show it to me, though. I think I closed that window. So, it's usually not an issue for people having blocked messages. Alright, so this is coming along. That was red, but compiling fixed it. So now we're down to list and update. So what is wrong with the list? Didn't fix it. It says must match base async with the project list response, not list of project list response. That's better. Alright, I guess that nupkeg extension looks like a virus or something to somebody. Last one, update. To do an update, we need to pass in an update to do item request, which is going to become an update project request, and it can just return back a project DTO, I think. But we'll make it a response. Update project response, which might have that DTO. So I come in here, update project request. I need an ID, I need a name, and that's it. Update project response. It's going to have a DTO. I think. Uh-oh, where'd that come from? API models. I want the one from project endpoints. Apparently I'm using it in multiple places. Use the one that's right with me, right here. It really doesn't want to add that using statement. Okay, now it'll chain. Oh, it's this to-do items thing still. Endpoints, project endpoints. There you go. Now you'll find it. Alright. No. No, no, no. Here. That one. Anything that ends with ugets, not only of English because of a special meaning outside of the .NET community. Well, there's no like text-to-speech stuff going on, is there? Does Twitch have something that's going to try and pronounce the extensions you put in? I can't think of a offensive word or something that ends with ugets. Alright, project. No, 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 no. Copy. Paste. Projects, updates a project. And yes, I would do this with Visual Studio Find and Replace, except that it was being really slow for some reason. Alright, this should be update project request and update project response. And once we get in here, we're going to say existing thing project dot name equals, well, we're not going to call it equals though, we're going to say existing project dot update name with request dot name, do the thing, get a response, or create a response, which is going to be a new update project response, and it's going to have a new project DTO, ID, right, like that. So close. That doesn't go there. Anyway, my question was something I've been debating myself lately. How's your release management for your open source projects? Do you have a branch used for releases of packages, one for development of the next release, or just single one you release and develop on, or something else? Most of them it's single master, and whenever I feel like it, I release something. Occasionally, if I've got big features happening, like Faceni, who's been on here for the last while, he and I are working on our specification project, and that's a little bit more involved than some of the other ones, so it actually has better release management. There's a separate branch for the next version that we're going to try and build, I think, or at least there was for the one we just did. I think when we get ready to start on the next one, we'll add that branch if it's not already there. But yeah, those are basically my two things. You know, basically just have main branch and update whenever I feel like it, and otherwise it's just feature branches, if any. Sometimes I just commit to main because it's mostly just me. Or a new version branch that we apply new things to, and then once that whole version is ready, then merge it all into main and deploy from there. Most of my apps that do NuGet packages have a pretty simple GitHub action that just publishes them, and if I don't update the project, I don't have any of them open right now, but if I don't update in here, there's a version in a property, and if I don't update that, then it just bounces. So it'll try and publish, but it'll bounce because NuGet will give it an error and say, well, there's already a package with this version. So basically the way I trigger a new version is by updating that config file and then committing to master. And so I can do as many things as I want, and as long as I don't change that version in the project file, it won't actually publish anything. And then as soon as I change the version on the file, that's when the publish will actually go through. Justin asks if I use tags. Agil asks if I use patches to releases. I have not done any patches to releases. Generally, if I fix stuff that was broken in a release, I just ship a new release. So If you want the fix, you just upgrade to the new release. As far as tags, I do have some tags in some things. I think guard clauses uses them. Let me see, I'll pull that up. So if we go up here, and that didn't work, get all the way up there. If we go to GitHub, Ardalis, you can go here and you can see the most popular things. Guard clauses is one of them. And it has releases and tags. It says the latest one was September 2020. I'm not sure that's even accurate. 3.0.0 is the latest release here, which was from a tag. But you can see here I've shipped 3.1 and I didn't tag it. So apparently I was not consistent about it 2 months ago. But I do try to use them when I remember. I'm just not always that consistent because I have way too many stupid things I'm involved in. Because I have 28 different packages I'm trying to maintain, and so you would think that with 28 different packages I would have a a rock solid system for automating all this and making it easy. But no, I have a inconsistent system where every single one of these has a different way of doing it, and I have to try and remember what I was doing with each one. And that's why they're not super consistent all the time. But I do try to keep them consistent as best I can. Dev Invisible, he's back. Any chance a quick update, or should I just rewatch? I didn't do much since you left, Dev Invisible. My big suggestion was add an issue to GitHub, and we'll track it down. But I wanted to get my clean architecture stuff done, which it's getting close to being done. Let's see, where are we at? Everything builds. What? I've still got 2 minutes left. Amazing. I'll bet my tests don't pass. Alright, so yeah, if you file an issue on EShop on web, I'll track it down from there. So if let's look at our Swagger, we have our project endpoints. We still have these to-do item endpoints. That shouldn't be there, I don't think, because that one's projects. That one's different. So I must have missed a couple of those. But let's do this get and try it out and execute. And it says, look, there's a project. Alright, so that's good. And it gave me a list of projects. Let's do is our get by ID. Here's get by ID. Try it out. 1, execute. Ta-da, that worked. Alright. So let's try how bad are our tests. There's obviously still some things that need fixed, but this might be getting close enough that I can merge this in. Nope. I'm not going to merge it in while there's tests failing. I have a workflow that kicks off a release when I create a GitHub release. Have you considered nerdbank.git versioning? I've never heard of nerdbank.git versioning. I will Google it, I guess. Stamp your something something. This package adds precise Semver compatible Git commit information to every assembly. Okay. Interesting. I will check it out. Thanks for the tip. Alright, functional tests. I only have 3 of them. And this one is failing. So let's go open it up. Come on, Visual Studio. You're supposed to open the thing when I click on it. There it goes. Wow, is it being slow? Alright, so here we are. So we're going to go to API to do items. Well, that's no longer a thing, so that's not going to work. Or is it? Here's API. Here's API to do items. Say, give me one of these. Select those. Alright, so what is the error? Status code's not success. Line 25. Okay, so when we say get API to do items, you're not working. So let's see what happens. Because that really ought to be hitting API to do items. This is a base API controller. Base API controller says API controller. Should be API slash to do items. There's my list. There's my spec. Breakpoint that. Come back to my test. Here. And let's debug our test. Yeah, the thing that bugs me about your question, Dev Invisible, is that that totally used to work, and there's no reason why it shouldn't work now. So it's weird. Okay, let's just continue. So we hit the endpoint, and null reference, object was not set. Project is null, get by. Alright. So I have a spec, and the spec says that I have project by ID with item spec, repository, get by spec async. It's not working. So one of two things is happening there. That means that I didn't see the data correctly, or the specification is wrong, and I don't think the specification is wrong because it's really simple. So the specification for project by ID is this, and it just says where the project's ID equals the project ID, so that's pretty trivial. So why would that be null in here? This thing runs from custom web app factory, which is this. This custom web app factory says ensure created and then seed the database. Let's make sure that's getting hit when we run this. Let's try it again. Actually, I should go check and see what that seed data is doing. It absolutely used to work. I currently use that app in my automated test environment. Git tells me something changed in ASP.NET Core 5. I'm 99% sure you're right. You think VSS though, you want to try using it on AWS EC2 instance through a remote desktop with connection experience set to low bandwidth. Yeah. What is going on here? Oh, it's nice when the breakpoint is highlighted, but it's not invisible. Alright, so there it is. So let's step into that and see what we're doing here. We're going to try and add some items. I think my test data is wrong. I think that's my problem. I need to add a project here. So this populate test data, seed data, does not have a project, does it? Do item. Right, there's nothing here about projects, so that's not good. So that's never going to work. So for each item, remove it. Okay, save that. Really ought to just be able to delete the projects. Alright, let's try this. Var project equal new project test project. Project.add item to do item 1, 2, 3. DB context dot projects dot add project, save changes. That should work. It's probably going to break other things. Yes, but why would anyone do that? Alright, see ya, Ego. Good night. But why are you not using a local computer, I guess is the question, Surly Dev. Are you remoting in so that you're in a special environment or domain? We've added a few people here. I'm almost having to scroll on Chatty to see all the people. Welcome. Hey, look at that, it passed. That's amazing. Alright, so we were just wrapping up here with our refactoring efforts to turn this into a better organized thing. I'm going to do a commit because everything is working. So, let's see, added back endpoints and got them working. Commit and push. Since you're on unit test, do you integration test third-party libraries your project may use? Yeah, usually, a little bit. Not necessarily like every single place that they ever get used, but For example, here, a third-party library I'm using is EF Core. So I have integration tests in here. Let's hide that for data, and I just do essentially these are testing these repositories, this repository, but under the hood that repository is actually using Entity Framework, right? It's an EF repository. So when I say get repository, it's getting an Entity Framework repository, and then I'm verifying that hey, I can actually save things with this thing. Having a hard time justifying it since I don't have control over third-party libraries. Yeah, so I'm not testing Entity Framework directly, but I'm testing my adapter for it. So when I'm using third-party libraries, frequently I try and put all the places I'm going to use that third-party library in one class, or as few classes as I can get away with, so that it's easier to test and easier to swap it out as a modular thing in the future if I want to. And so if you look at this code and you say, you know what, this solution, which consists of these three projects plus shared kernel, this thing is using Entity Framework for all of its data access. So let's search and see. Control-Shift-F. Let's see how many instances of DB context are in here. All right, and try this on your solution that's using DB context and see what the difference is. So there's a bunch of commented out stuff here and some things in seed for startup. We'll ignore the tests for now. But basically, the main one is this app.db context. I mean, obviously it's defined. And then this EF repository, which right now all this stuff's commented out, and I'll show you why in a second. So let's just pop these things. So that's it for the whole program. Is the context itself, the EF repository, startup, setup, which is doing my DI, and then the program, which is again doing seed data, and then this seed data and this seed data. So these, well, that's actually adding it. So that's DI. So it's all in one place is the point, right? So this is where that code lives, that knows about EF, and it's basically all inside this one class, or would be, except that I actually replaced it with this repository base of T that comes from another library, this Ardalis specification thing. But you don't have DB context just all over the place is the point. And so when I'm writing those integration tests, I'm verifying that my EF repository works with EF to do the things it's supposed to do. And so if I had some other third-party library, I might do the same thing. I might have an adapter for it, and I would test that my adapter worked when integrated with this third-party library. And so I'd write those tests. Remote servers, something I can use to set up like an EF instance. Sure. It's a web request library to a remote server. So how would you integration test a web request library to a remote server? If I were doing that, I would create something on localhost, and I would test the web request library against something on localhost to see if it worked. Worst case scenario, I'd create a Docker setup. Maybe I have to have two nodes in it, but I have my tests in one node, have another remote service in another Docker container, spin it up with Docker Compose, and then test that I can have that library talk to that other server inside the Docker network, and then pull the results from there. If you want to see an example of how to Dockerize your integration tests, I have one in the specification repo. So, and I have a blog post about it too somewhere, I think. But if you go to GitHub, github.com/Ardalis, whack specification, we look at the integration tests for this one, maybe. Tests, integration, are these still here, Ficeni? I think we might have pulled them out. Somewhere in there we had a Docker Compose and some tests. Maybe they're only here. Run tests. Yeah, this is it. So they're only in the root. But this Docker Compose YAML basically spins up an actual database. So this is a SQL database. And then this is the thing that runs the Docker file that runs the tests. And then run tests.batch file just says build and then spin up the container and it'll run the tests. Have you tried .NET test containers? No, what's that? And I do have to go in a minute. I'm over time at this point. But it's a great lab that can help you with spinning up containers from code. Okay, that could be cool. Gear page not found. What? That's not cool. I do still have a gear page. Let's go. That's because the bot said something about it. Ardalis.com, whack gear. Bam. Huh. Well, I think that's tools. I think that's supposed to be tools. I think the bot is wrong. Yeah, that's supposed to be tools. I mean the bot wrong. But you know what? I actually have that here. So we can go find whatever it was that triggered that thing to do that. Somebody said something. Maybe it's gear. Somebody said gear. Maybe? Gear, advanced settings, tools, command aliases, tools. Did you say tools? In my case, it's a web request library to a remote server. I don't see where anyone said any of these things. Setup? Maybe it's, setup. There it is. So this keyword setup was what did it. So I need to come here, I need to say see Ardalis' gear and setup at that, which should really be tools. Save. There we go. Fix that bot. Real-time debugging. And if that actually works, then somebody could say, what's your setup, Ardalis? And it would say that. And now it says tools. Sweet. We're using test containers to spin up Postgres instance before integration tester run. Nice. I haven't done Docker from code, so that could be cool. I don't need that anymore. And let's go here, remove using, commit. I am not going to totally merge this in yet, so I still want to do a few more checks, but I think we're in a good spot to wrap it up. I'm going to pull up Twitch live coders and see if there's anybody that we might want to raid that might be doing, you know, same kind of stuff I'm doing, because I don't want to send you off to something that's totally different. Manning Publications, what are they doing? Interesting. So here's the, if you go to Twitch TV team live coders, or you just go to livecoders.dev, you can see what other people are doing. It's really hard to see what other people are doing when everything wants to show me ads though. Let me see if I can actually finish an ad if it'll let me see stuff. Alright, so I can't even see what that is. But it doesn't look like C#. That's, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. What are you guys talking about? I don't know who Tim McNamara is. Code calls. Machine learning to find the perfect VS Code theme. Treadmill is not in your list of gear. Oh, I should add that. I do have a blog post about the treadmill. Lena does C# Unity. Yeah, but most of the time when I check out what Lena's doing, she's building models for things. It's all like 3D graphics and stuff. There's almost never actual code. So that's why I don't do much of that. So I don't find it that interesting for me. Let's raid this bald bearded builder, and you guys can learn about VS Code themes. I don't think I've ever raided him before, so it'll be a surprise. So we'll pop over here, and we'll find my dashboard, and I'll say thanks everybody for hanging out with me today, but I gotta go. I do follow Bald Bearded Builder, so let's start a raid and send him some peoples, and I'll jump in here in a second. Where'd it go? I said start the raid. There it is. Raid now. Alright, so thanks everybody. If you guys are looking for the code for what I was just working on, it is at github.com /Ardalis /clean architecture. That's what we've been working on today, so go check that out. Everything I'm doing is in this project aggregate branch right here, so check that out, and it'll all be merged in sometime soon. All right, let's go see what Bald Bearded Builder's working on.